Okay. So when I sat down next to Andrew after coffee, I whispered to him, please set the bar low because I'm coming after you. Well, thanks a lot, Andrew. I've actually been to Great Yarmouth twice in the 34 years I've lived in this country. On the first visit, it was a very grim and rainy May day. I think it was the first May bank holiday in the first year that I lived in the UK. And my husband and I got off the coach at Great Yarmouth and took one look around us and got on the next coach out. The second visit was when I came to see Andrew because I was at a folk camp nearby, and I came and spent an afternoon with him, and I got a much better view of Great Yarmouth, and I got a tremendous view of all the wonderful work that Andrew and his organization do. So I might even go back to Great Yarmouth again someday. Right. Now, I've spoken about my father before here, about his life and his work, and of course, Lucy mentioned his contribution to many fields of endeavor. Myron Tribus was a quality mentor, an engineer, a scientist, an educator, an intellectual, and many other things. Well, today I want to tell you a bit about Myron Tribus, my father. As you can see, he threw himself into fatherhood with the same enthusiasm he put into his career. And one of my very best memories is of him telling me stories. He would retell old favorites with his own twist. For example, for the story of the three little pigs, he would ask me to choose 3 different kinds of building materials, 2 of them silly and 1 of them sensible. And it would go something like this. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs who lived on a farm with their mother. One day, Mother Pig decided that her boys were big enough to leave home and start their own lives, so she could get on with hers. She gave each one £100 and told each one to go and build a house for himself. The first pig walked down the road until he met a man selling prunes. "That will make a nice house," he said, and he bought the man's whole supply for £100, and he used it to build a fine house made out of prunes by the roadside. The second little pig walked into the woods until he met a man selling hotel room keys. "That will make a nice house," he said, and he bought the man's whole supply of hotel room keys for £100, and he used it to buy a fine house in the woods. The third little pig walked along the road until he met a man selling granite. Concrete would do as well. "That will make a great house," he said, and he bought the man's whole supply for £100, and he used it to build a fine house next to the river. Now, so the 3 little pigs settled down happily in their 3 houses made of prunes, hotel room keys, and granite. And for a time, everything was peaceful and fine. One day, however, the local wolf heard about the 3 juicy brother pigs living near his territory, so he decided to see for himself. The first house that the wolf found was the one made of prunes, which was built by the road. He gave the usual threats about huffing and puffing. Little pig, let me come in." "Oh no, not by the hair of your chinny chin chin." And he puffed, and he knocked it over with a single breath. What a mess, all those prunes all over the ground. So luckily the little pig slipped out the back door in time and ran to his brother's house in the woods. Now the second house that the wolf came to was, of course, the second brother's house made of hotel room keys that was in the woods, and the wolf did his spiel. Little pig, chinny chin chin, and he gave a big huff, and of course the house fell down, and the hotel room keys flew everywhere. The little pig slipped out the door, both of them slipped out the door, and they ran to their brother's house by the river, the house of granite. Well, by the time the wolf arrived at the house of granite by the river, he was completely out of breath and very, very hungry. Well, you know the rest of the story. The wolf huffed, And he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed to no avail. He could not blow over the house made of granite. He slunk away in shame, and the 3 pigs lived happily ever after. Now, the wolf was occasionally seen in other fairy tales, but those never ended well for him either. So what would Myron have said about this story? He would have said, the pig's project management skills left a lot to be desired. That there was no evidence of collecting statistics about building materials or building processes. There was no consultation of any sort. I mean, prunes, for heaven's sakes. There were no formal plans or a budget, just the £100 their mother gave them. There was a complete lack of systems thinking and systems thinking tools. There was no PDSA thinking about the whole process. And there was no evidence of improvement tools, techniques, or projects. And no understanding of the customer. As Deming would have said, they were being ruined by their best efforts. Now, before I go on, I just want to give special mention to some of the absolutely wonderful ideas that came out of this exercise. I couldn't use them all. Under the topic of sensible building materials were experience and a plan, which I agree with completely. And the 3 silly suggestions that tickled me the most, but which I really couldn't use, were kittens, traffic wardens, and lead violinists. Well, we didn't want to feed them to the wolf, did we? No. But thank you very much for taking part in this. And I recommend that you have a look at these later and try making up your own 3 little pig stories with these. It's very amusing. And if you have children, it's great for children. So, what exactly is the organ scholar's lament? This story starts with my son, Myron's grandson, Raphael Tribus Coleman. Right. So there he is. Now, as some of you know, Rafi is a twin. He and his sister Amanda are twins, and so I have an obligation to spend equal time bragging about his sister, Amanda. So Rafi finished Cambridge, went to Cambridge as an organ scholar at Magdalen College, Cambridge, finished in 2015. Amanda went to Trinity College, Oxford, as a choral scholar and also finished in 2015. And their father and I call them the Oxbridge twins. Now, see me afterwards during the drinks if you want to hear me brag about my older daughter, Danielle. So Rafi spent his gap year before taking up his scholarship at Cambridge at the Royal Academy of Music. And he also spent that time being a substitute organist at a number of churches around London. And sometimes I'd give him a lift to these different organ jobs. And one day, he emerged from a church in a foul mood. It seemed that the vicar's assistant hadn't briefed him very well about the service. She hadn't told him about changes to the order of service, and as a result, he played the wrong music at the wrong time to the confusion of the vicar, the choir, and the congregation. As she paid Rafi his organist fees, she implied that it was all his fault and that he wouldn't be asked back. My response to Rafi, which I confess probably didn't seem like a comforting maternal response at the time, was that the vicar's assistant didn't understand that Rafi was her customer. I also said that she had no understanding of systems or Deming's 85-15 rule. That was really not much comfort to Rafi, needless to say. So, it's okay, got it. So Rafi's experience made me think about the challenges of identifying your customer if you're in a non-manufacturing or non-retail setting. Who exactly is your customer if you're one of these people, or if you belong to one of these groups? Who is your customer? It's something that isn't always obvious. And sometimes it isn't who you think it is. Now, Dave Power confessed to being a geek, so I feel comfortable in this setting to also confess to being a geek. I'm a language geek. And I have been thinking, whoops, you're right, you mustn't press it too hard. I've been thinking about the best word to use to describe what passes between a supplier and a customer in a non-retail situation. And I've decided to revive an old word, custom, which means the regular dealings with a shop or business by customers. And an example of its usage is if we don't give good service, people will take that custom elsewhere. So I'm going to be talking about the flow of custom between players in a process. Please feel free to use whatever other word you feel suits you. So in his book, The Deming Dimension, Henry Neve poses a question which I've also heard my father ask. The identification of suppliers and customers can hardly be taken for granted. For example, who is the customer of a hospital? Is it the patient's family, the doctor, the nurses, the Ministry of Health? Is it society? Deming wrote about two kinds of customers, internal customers and external customers. External customers are people who are outside your organization and who benefit from or are affected by who are affected by or who pay for your organization's product or services, such as these people. They're all external customers. Some organizations, you can't really identify the external customer, and it can be challenging. Sometimes we mistake the external customer for the product. Myron said, a school is not a factory, students are not the product, their education is the product, and the customers for this product are several. The students, their parents, future employers, society at large, but the students are not the product. Internal customers are the people who are directly connected to an organization and are usually internal to that organization. Internal customers are vital parts of an organization's processes. And this group shows you some of the people who would be considered internal customers in an organization. So Dave Power mentioned attention to customers and attention to staff as important in changing culture. And in many ways, they're actually the same thing, customers and staff, depending on your process and how you look at it. And I think you've all seen this diagram. Everyone in the system is a customer of someone else in the system. And thinking about the system also requires thinking about the internal customer. Now here's an example from teaching. As Lucy said, I was a teacher for 24 years. I tried, and as I've spoken before in these conferences, I have tried to bring some Deming philosophy and quality management tools into my classroom with varying degrees of success. So this is an example of some assessment data from my last school. The names of the children and the assessment marks don't really matter. Don't worry whether it's an A or a B or a C or what number it is. What's important is that the very light green ones show progress from one term to the next. They're meant to be orange, show that the marks have stayed the same, and the pink means the mark went down. So this was end of term assessment in reading. Now, when the head of my school saw the spring assessment marks, he called me into his office to ask me a question. What do you think he wanted to ask me, looking at those colors? Any ideas what he might have been wanting to ask me? Why so many stayed the same? That's right. He wanted to know why my children weren't progressing. And I had no answer for him. To him, the obvious answer was that I wasn't a very good teacher. I knew he would not understand the true answer, the system's answer, which starts with a question. Who is this assessment for? Who is the information for? Who's the customer for this assessment? Any ideas who's the true customer for this assessment? To whom would it be most useful? You can raise your hand or shout it out. You're jumping ahead of yourself. I had only been at this school for a term and a half. The previous 2 assessments had been carried out by other teachers who knew something I didn't. They knew that the customer for assessment results, according to the school, were the school leadership team, the school governors, and Ofsted. They also knew that there was an unspoken, and therefore never told to me, expectation that assessment data would show progress from term to term. In other words, we were supposed to fudge it. We were supposed to make, if we couldn't make them green, we certainly shouldn't make them pink. We should make as many green as possible with maybe a few yellows. But pink was a real no-no. Never mind what the children were actually doing. So in my innocence, I thought that my pupils, their parents, and I were customers for this information. And I ignored past marks when I assessed them. This third set of marks represents a true assessment of my pupils, which didn't make the head very happy. And I may not be very good at organizational politics, which is why I've now left the classroom, but I am a good teacher, and these marks told me and my class exactly where I needed to put my efforts. I have another example from teaching. Well, just before, I'm sorry, it was, I've forgotten your name, you two. Tom and Adam spoke in the introduction that talked about reflective learning. Well, in teaching, we have reflective teaching. And this is an example of reflective teaching. I was struggling to teach a group of Year 4 children, most of whom did not speak English very well. Reflective teaching is a useful tool for teachers to deconstruct a lesson, plan for the next lesson, and find ways to improve upon it for the next time. And it only works if it's honest. No point in me writing, this was a great lesson, they all did really well. We're going to do two-dimensional shapes next week. That would have been a lie. So I wrote an honest assessment of the lesson. And the deputy head at this school, it was a different school, read all of our reflections and often made comments. Well, I guess I was ignorant of the system here too. I thought that I was my own customer for these reflections, and perhaps also other teachers were my customer because they would have these children further down the line. Well, apparently here as well, my customer was senior management and the Independent Schools Inspectorate. Heaven forbid they discovered that my teaching involved planning, delivering the lesson, studying the result of that lesson, and acting on my reflections about the lesson. On this occasion, I challenged him, as I said, it was a different school, and asked him, who was the reflection really for? Was it for me to improve my teaching skills and to improve the next lesson, or was it for the inspectors? And he did actually back down. So let's go back to the organ scholar. Who was involved in this situation? So all these people were involved in the situation that my son had. You have to ask, how does the custom flow between these people? And it might be easier to look at it this way. I apologize for the hint at bad language here. This is called deployment flow charting. And the difference between this and traditional flow charting methods is that this shows who is involved in the process. At the top, we have all the different players in this situation. And we have a regular organist, we have the choir and the congregation, we have the vicar, his assistant, and we have Rafi, who was the supply organ or the substitute organist at the time. As you can see, normally the regular organist is pretty cut off from the process, and that begs the question whether it really is business as usual when he's there playing the organ all alone in the organ loft. Do they really tell him what's going on, or does he have the same frustrations that Rafi had? We'll never know. So what I want to do is zoom in a bit on the process, just in case you're not familiar with deployment flow charting. I'll just explain what the symbols mean. So at the top is something a bit like this, which is where you would put the name of the person in the process. And it's important to include everybody in the process, even if they only have a small part. The rectangles are actions. Something happens where you've got a rectangle. So for instance, the vicar and the assistant, their action is preparing for the service, including the music, and informing the choir and the congregation. And that bit is under choir and congregation because they're involved in that too. The diamonds are decisions, and it's important that it's a yes-no decision. So what color shoes should I wear would not be the sort of decision you'd put on here, but should I wear red shoes is the sort of decision you'd put on here. Although hopefully you don't need that kind of decision making to decide what kind of shoes you want to wear. So if everything goes the way it should, and the vicar and his assistant tell the choir, and they tell the organist, and it's business as usual in the church service, amen. And if there's a supply organist, of course, as far as the vicar and the assistant are concerned, they make their preparations. If it's not a regular organist, have they prepared the supply organist properly? If they have, well, hallelujah, church service. But from Rafi's point of view, well, that's where bad words come in. So this is the adequate preparation bit. I've zoomed in on it. So the vicar and the assistant, somebody wants to know, have they informed the relief organist of the right time, the right place, what kind of church it is? Because, by the way, Rafi's Jewish, so what does he know between a Baptist church and a Catholic church? He needs to know what kind of church it is. Also, the question is, have they supplied the organist with the right music, the right order of service, anything special he needs to know? They also need to tell the organist whether the organ is friendly or not. Don't forget, church organs are often hand-built. They're often old. They all have their personalities. And if the stops on the right-hand side don't work, the organist needs to know this so that he can do a little trickery, jiggery-pokery with the organ, and it'll still sound fine. Well, probably, from the point of view of the vicar and the assistant, they think they've done all of this. So, hallelujah, church service is normal. For Rafi, well, bad words, I'm never coming back here. So let's zero in on where Rafi's swearing. Okay? He's going to say, am I at the right church? He doesn't know. What are they singing now? This is not what they told me. And what's wrong with this organ? Why don't these stops work? And so he ends up saying, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and never let me come back here again. In his short time as a relief organist, he had some interesting experiences. He experienced the following. He's gone to the wrong church. He got to the church and couldn't find the entrance because all the doors were locked except one, and he had to go around the church several times to find it. He's received the wrong music or the wrong information about music. He's received no information about changes in the service. He's not been told anything about the organ, so if it was a temperamental organ, he wouldn't have known. It would be when he got there and tried to play it. And the one I think that nearly broke him was when he wasn't told, this was a Baptist church, not that it matters, that the organ was the centerpiece of the church. It was right there on display to everybody. So he didn't realize this, but he couldn't go dressed as he normally goes to play the organ, in his dirty jeans with his hair uncombed, his ragged t-shirt, playing the pedals in his stocking feet. So luckily, thank goodness, he did actually wear a clean shirt and relatively clean jeans, but he was very annoyed that he couldn't play the organ, that everybody was looking at him and he couldn't play the organ in his stocking feet, and he never went back there again either. By the way, Rafi is a computer programmer in Leeds today, and his sister, because I have to give them equal bragging time, is in children's publishing in London. And I think actually it was the salary, not these experiences, that made him decide that he didn't want to be a professional organist. So that is actually the end of my story about the Organ Scholar's Lament. And I'd like to give you a chance to do some work. I'd like you to get into groups. You can decide how to group yourselves. We've got 6. These are the backup for us. And think about a process in your organization or a process that you've experienced and create a deployment flow chart for it. We do have some of these, but I think you'll find that Post-its are probably the best thing to use. But please feel free to come up and have some, to look at them, to give you inspiration. Be simple. You don't want to do a whole year of your organization or the whole management structure of your organization. Take something simple, like how a particular report gets out, or how you plan and deliver an office meeting. Something fairly simple, and show the relationships between the people. There should be lots of arrows going here and there and everywhere, and put the people under their slot so you can see the flow of custom between internal customers. And one thing that often happens in an internal process is that custom flows back and forth. So whatever your custom is has gone over to 2 other people, and it comes back to you. And like Chinese whispers, it may not be what you sent out. And that's part of the problem of the flow of custom. So the people from UIC are here to help you with this project. I'll over to Lucy, yeah. And of course, Deming himself said, all stages of the process work together towards quality that the ultimate customer will boast about. This is what I can do for you. Here's what you might do for me. This is the exchange between you and your customer as the flow of custom goes through your organization. Here's what I can do for you. This is what you can do for me. So it only remains for me to say thank you. After I put this together, I remembered that Deming himself actually composed organ music. He was a very religious man, and it was kind of a hobby of his, collecting and playing and composing his own organ music. And if I'd thought of it in time, I could have included some as a kind of something to carry us out for the day. I don't know where I would have got it, but if I ever have the chance, I'll look it up. I'm back this way in a week's time. I'm going to be camping in a field up by Carsington Water. For anybody who's local and would like to come and see me, I'm going to be at something called Folk Camp. See me later and I'll tell you about it. So that's that. And it only remains for me to say thank you very much to Lucy and everybody else from the UIC for inviting me again this year. And I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. And I look forward to talking to all of you at drinks and dinner. Thank you.